Let me ask Aditi. Aditi, judging just the resumes for all their careers, and I know Russell's got a bigger resume and he won a Super Bowl. Do you agree with what Bull just said, that he believes Deshaun Watson is a better quarterback than Russell Wilson? Not necessarily now, but better at his peak than Russell was at his peak. Because I don't believe that.
I think you don't believe that?
I don't. No.
I think if you asked every NFL team, off the field stuff aside, if that didn't exist,
right?
If you asked every NFL team, would you rather have Deshaun Watson at 26 or Russell Wilson at 26? I don't think there's a team that would take Russell Wilson. I don't know that for a fact, but I bet you that's true. Didi?
Here's what I'd say, guys. I think that, covering this league for 15 years, I think evaluating a quarterback in a silo is probably, or a vacuum, I don't know what the right phrase is there.
Yeah, it's hard.
It's probably the hardest thing to do.
Yeah, it is for sure.
When you sit here, it's, Russell Wilson played with an amazing defense. And I'll just say this, it's not even about the defense and the run game and the O-line. It's the way an offense can play based on the way a defense plays, or the way a defense can play based on the way an offense plays.
So
I'll go back a couple weeks. I had the Dolphins and the Texans, and the Dolphins defensive coordinator, Josh Boyer, is talking about how he doesn't need to be so aggressive on defense 100%. Because he's playing with an offense that can score 40 points a game, 30 to 40 points a game. And so what you call, what you do, again, it's all connected. It's all interconnected.
I know, Aditi, that you're absolutely right, and it is an unfair question. It's just one of these arguments that sports fans always have. So
this is kind of like saying, okay, let's compare Terry Bradshaw to Ben Roethlisberger.
Yeah,
let's
it doesn't
compare
work.
Jim Brown
it doesn't
to Nick
work
Chubb.
because now you're crossing
errors.
It
doesn't make sense.
But what about skill sets? Like, I think as seasoned professionals that we all are, we can, with our eyes, assess a player's skill set.
I don't actually think it's close between Watson and Wilson.
Now, as I'm framing this argument, I'm going to say, because now I'm trying to take all the weird factors out.
Right.
The fact that Deshaun hasn't had great talent around him.
Well, that's what PFF does, essentially.
Right. So the skill sets themselves, and Russell, Russell was an MVP candidate not that long ago.
No,
so
he's never got an MVP vote.
No, but he was a candidate. He was a candidate. I think everybody knows that he was in the mix. So I think if you just assess it on just skill set, I probably would say I think Deshaun Watson's skill set is better than Russell's overall, but I don't think it's by a mile. Am I wrong?
Sure. I mean, I think that's fair, right? I think that he's got a great touch pass, which he told us he learned from Matt Ryan when he was a ball boy back in Flowery Branch, right? He's a great anticipation thrower. He can use his legs. All of these things, yes, but reading a defense is so much about playing quarterback. So that's like a mental part, rallying your teammates around you, making the right reads, making the right calls, getting people that play next to you to play better. Like, all of that goes into the evaluation of the position of quarterback. So, Jay, while I respect your saying that it's only the physical, it's not only about the physical. If it was only about the physical, Ryan Leaf would have been just as good as Peyton Manning.
I said skill set, and to me, certainly reading the defense is absolutely a tool in a quarterback's box that he needs to have. Now, I do think Russell Wilson is better at reading defenses, going through his progressions, finding the right read. I don't know about Deshaun Watson, and I'll.
Do we know that?
I'll ask you that.
How would we know that?
I don't know
that I've watched enough.
Bull, I'm not stating it definitively. I'm just saying with my eyes. I've watched Russell Wilson for a very long time, and I do think that he understands defensive concepts.
But again, Russell Wilson's played with great talent and great coaching. Deshaun Watson hasn't.
Yeah, I don't know. Again,
listen
I'm not
to what
saying
Jay just said. Jay just said that he's watched Russell Wilson for a very long time.
Yes.
We in the football space love youth. We love young rookies. We love young people on TV. We love youth. But it's the very long time, the experience that matters so much. Whether you're a host or a reporter or an anchor like Jay, who can go back to something he covered 10 years ago and create a connective tissue, or you're a quarterback who has seen every defense there is to see over the last 10 years. And I just feel like, look, Deshaun Watson played on Sunday like a guy who hasn't played in 2 years, which he hasn't.
Tell us more about, give us more of your thoughts on how he played.
Look, I had a conversation with Pep Hamilton. Pep Hamilton, who of course is the Texans offensive coordinator, came to Houston specifically because he thought he was coaching Deshaun Watson. I mean, talk about being snookered, right? He moves his whole family. He enrolls his quarterback son into a Texas high school. He does all of this because he thinks this is the guy that he's coaching. Didn't happen, but he very, very clearly remembered a conversation that he'd had with Deshaun Watson early on before everything blew up. And by blew up, I mean before he even before Deshaun said that he wanted out of Houston. Forget all of the charges and the allegations. But Pep said at that time, Deshaun Watson was very clearly a top 5 quarterback. But they had a conversation about getting over that hump to be the number 1 quarterback in the league. And what did that look like? And what was that conversation? I'll tell you, it was really, Pep was saying, you've got to learn how to take the check down. That part of being the greatest quarterback is knowing when you need to throw the ball away and live to see another down, or when you need to take the easy completion as opposed to giving everything up for the fireworks. Anyway, that was the conversation they had. They were talking about getting Deshaun to the level where he would be the number 1 or number 2 quarterback instead of the number 5 or number 6. Well, now fast forward to where we are today. Forget getting to the elite level. Right now, Deshaun Watson needs to get back up to speed. I mean,
get to your Jacoby Brissett level.
People text me in the middle of the game on Sunday to say, so when's Kevin putting Jacoby Brissett back in? Because that's how rusty Deshaun Watson was. That's how off Deshaun Watson looked. To sit here and have the conversation about his physical skills right now, I think the conversation really is, how long is it going to take to get up to speed?
Well, let me ask you this, Aditi, because I said this in the morning conversation. I said that if you were to ask a coach right now, based on how much experience in him playing more than Deshaun Watson, I believe wholeheartedly that Jacoby Brissett would give you a better chance in the earlier weeks against the Bengals than Deshaun Watson. And it's not that I don't like Deshaun Watson. But you still got to
play him because you got to get him ready for next year.
I don't disagree. Lovie Smith said the same thing to us in our production meeting. Lovie Smith is talking about how well Jacoby played, how well he played against Tampa Bay. And he said, you know what? I think we got lucky. He said, I think it would have been harder to face this guy Brissett, who's playing lights out in Lovey's mind, that it would be harder to face this guy Brissett, that's what he said, than a guy who's been off for 700 days.
Yep.
Yeah, bring
and
that
he's right. I mean, look, the Browns needed 2 defensive touchdowns and a special teams touchdown to win. If they play the same way on offense Sunday against the Bengals, they're losing by 40.
You're right.
It's just, they've got to be better.
You are right.
But there's no choice because he's the better player. You have to get him ready for, if the Browns were 7-4 or 8-3, maybe you'd think differently.
Sure.
But you got to play him because you got to get him ready.
Oh, he can play.
Yes,
right?
And I agree with you 100%, Adam. This is not a question right now of securing your seeding in the playoffs.
Right.
You sure as heck are hoping that you can get into the playoffs.
Sure.
You sure as heck are hoping that Deshaun Watson can lead a 6-0 finish to the season. Am I doing the math of that right? 4, 6, 10.
Yeah,
yes.
5 games.
You're
5 games.
Well, 5 left.
He can close out the season.
Right, yeah.
Right.
Sure.
Well, he had the first win, so you
Yes.
can you hope that he closes out 5 and that 10-7 backs you into the playoffs. But right now, the Browns are thinking big picture, and their future, as they have tied it with that guaranteed contract, is to Deshaun Watson.
Yeah.
So they need to get him ready. They cannot wait for the offseason to get him
Aditi,
ready.
speaking of 5 games, we were trying to figure out why the Browns have won 5 games against Cincinnati in a row, despite the fact that they're clearly the superior team over that length of time.
Well, the Browns were better in 2020.
Can you explain to us, though, how we somehow, do you think it's as I do, sort of a statistical anomaly?
Nobody played Week 17 last year, right? Joe Burrow, Joe Mixon, Jamar Chase, everybody sat. I think Chase sat. But anyway, they all had COVID or they all sat or whatever the reason was. Nobody played Week 17.
They had clinched.
Chase played the first series to break the rookie
Yeah, to get the record.
and everybody else sat.
Overall, why do you think this happens, Aditi?
I mean, I think it's a nice matchup, right? Like, you could go through and you could say that each individual game has something going to it. The previous game last year, the one in Cincinnati, that was the Odell Beckham Jr. drama week, but it was also, the game opened with Denzel Ward having that 99-yard pick 6. Nick Chubb had it, and that just set the tone. If you remember that game, Joe Burrow marched right down the field, no issue, and then all of a sudden Denzel Ward, and that changes the entire shape of the game. I mean, talk about buzzkill and momentum and all of that, and the crowd is taken out of the game immediately. We could go through and do that with all of the last 6 games and say what it was, but I think in some ways this is it's a nice matchup because the Browns can run the ball and they can keep the ball away from the Bengals, and that limits the Bengals' explosiveness. I think that what the Browns can do up front with Myles Garrett and Clowney is a nice matchup against a Bengals line that historically has struggled and that is still sort of trying to prove that, you know, it's that and then some. The Browns secondary has been a nice matchup when it's been healthy. And that, of course, is a question, has been a nice matchup for a Bengals team that has 3 great receivers. I mean, when you've got Greg Newsome, who is an elite talent playing inside, not everybody's slot corner plays like Greg Newsome does. So in some ways, it's a nice, like, good on good. And that's where it sort of works. But I wouldn't bank on the fact that, the Browns have historically had success against this team, meaning anything.
It's
I mean,
like
for a long time, Steelers historically had success against the Bengals.
I think it gets, I was saying before, Aditi, I think it gets cemented if the Browns win this game. Because the difference to me now is, you're right, in the trenches, the Browns have had the advantage. I no longer think they do. The Bengals' offensive line is significantly better than it's been right now. If you look at them over the last 5, 6, 7 weeks, they're playing at worst like an average offensive line, and that's all they need is an average offensive line with the skill position talent they have. They'll have Chase back. Plus, the Browns' offensive line is playing their worst football in 3-4 years right now. And so those advantages that the Browns have,
they're on their 5th string center. Can we at least address that?
We understand there's reasons for it. The center has turned into a disaster because Pochich was playing great, and Froholt, or Haagen-Dazs as I call him, he can't play.
I think part of his private center is that he's not a center.
Call him that, but
no,
he's not a
that's
center.
anti-Scandinavian.
I mean, how admirable it is that he's even doing what he's doing right now.
Gutsy effort.
But Wyatt Teller's not playing well right now. He must not be 100%
Teller is
right.
not playing well.
He's not playing well.
He has the calf.
So, and they're not getting great tackle play. And the Bengals' defensive line is fully healthy right now. They didn't have DJ Reader, which is a big deal for their first matchup.
For the Monday night.
That's going to be interesting. I mean, obviously the Browns are going to have a massive game on the ground to win, because the way, I think we'd all expect Watson to be better this week, but I don't think anybody's expecting him to be the great player.
I wonder, Bull, and Aditi, you can weigh in on this. I wonder if, in his mind, Stefanski knew that Watson was going to be as bad as he was, because, and I'm just going off the top of my head, I didn't even dive into the numbers. It felt to me like this was one of the more run over pass games that the Browns have had all year.
Right. Well,
in the
but that was the second half. They had the lead.
They ran the ball 23 times, passed it 8 times in the second half.
Yeah,
second half.
But so at least Stefanski made the adjustment.
Yeah, no. I said this in my hit on the NFL Today at noon on Sunday, that Kevin Stefanski needed to help Deshaun Watson with his play calling. Yeah. So what did that help mean? Relying on the run game and trying to get him easy completions, to get him comfortable and confident again. Look, I'll tell you from my point of view, when I don't do a game for 2 weeks, I feel like I'm rusty. Sure. Tua, who's arguably one of the top 3 quarterbacks in the league this past year, he missed 2 games because of the concussion, and he said he felt incredibly rusty on a Sunday night. It's just the nature. This guy has sat for 2 years. Yeah. He has not seen a live rush in 2 years. He has not read a live defense in 2 years. I don't care what he was doing with some 30-year-old receivers for 6 weeks, 7 weeks in Berea with his quarterbacks coach Quincy Avery. It's not the same as being on the field and seeing a live rush and seeing a live defense. And all of that coming at you like this and having to make those decisions. So Kevin certainly was trying to help him. He was trying to get him more comfortable, get him more confident. I think that it helped Watson to be in Houston, a place where he's very, very familiar, where he still has a house up the road, where 18 of his family members were spending the weekend. I think, and I had this conversation with the great Jake Trotter, who of course writes for ESPN.com out of Cleveland this morning. He was writing about the boos, and I said to him, Jake, I got to be honest with you. Like, from the field, it really didn't seem any different than any other away team.
Aditi, I saw that.
You got to have a crowd of people to boo.
I saw that, and you know what it looked like to me, because I know this happens, and you know this happens. It almost sounds to me like that was this, and I don't know this, and I don't want to accuse Jake of being spoon-fed a story by his assignment desk, but I've seen this before, where writers are kind of told, this is the story that we're looking for, and they get there and they're like, yeah, but this isn't really the story, but this is the story we want. Because when I read that, I'm like, I didn't think the boos were a factor at all. And I just was like, why is he writing about this?
I'm not going to say that about Jake. I will be
hate
very
to do
honest
that
about
too,
this.
but I
I'll
know
say
that in the past I've
Jake.
seen it happen that way. Not with Jake,
Sure.
but
And I actually did ask Jake. I'm like, do you think that there was any like piped in noise up high, like up on the press box? Because my impression, and he very validly said, if you look at a lot of national writers kind of said the same thing. I think that Mike Jones in The Athletic was a little bit more sort of like, hey, people were apathetic and pretty tepid. And I'll tell you, I can only speak to my experience. I don't know what it sounded like from up in the press box or way in the stands. But on the field, I was on the field in Jacksonville. There was a lot of noise in Jacksonville for a preseason game. There was a lot of profane chanting. There were a lot of vulgarities. This past week, I talked to the league several times, and my entire broadcast crew had multiple meetings. What are we going to do if there's profane signs? What if there are vulgarities? What if there is an unfurled banner? What if there is a streaker? What if there is a demonstration? I got all the rules on when the Texans security is allowed to take away signage, what all of that is. There was none of it, guys.
I know.
Nothing.
That's why I was surprised Jake wrote about it.
I think the booze
I didn't hear a single profane chant. There was not one demonstration or protest that anybody came through. Tony Busby talked about making this a stunt, that he was going to be here with bells and whistles on. Never saw anything. And I'll tell you this, I was looking, and were there boos? Yeah, there were boos. There were always boos for the opposing team.
That's right.
And quite frankly, it was a half-empty arena. There are fans there that just don't really care about the home team right now. There's a lot of apathy.
I saw a lot of Browns fans.
A lot of Browns fans, yeah.
You know, like it certainly wasn't like the Browns booing the Bengals in Cleveland, or the Bengals booing the Steelers in Cincinnati, or the Ravens booing somebody in Baltimore. Like it just felt like.
I know they didn't show him on the broadcast, but did you see Tony Busby and his crew that he was supposed to bring there?
I never saw them.
They weren't there.
No.
Were they not? Did you hear that they weren't there, or did you just?
He posted an Instagram post.
I didn't. You know
from
what,
the
guys?
suite.
I'll be honest. I didn't seek it out. I wasn't interested in seeking it
No,
out.
I just wondered. I know they didn't focus on it. I just wondered if that was a thing, and he was trying to get attention.
We talked about it in the car on the way home. Our director never saw anything.
Got it.
Now, again, the cameras weren't scanning to find them. The cameras did find the box that Deshaun Watson's whole family was in.
Oh, there was
like that a number of times.
There was a family reunion up there.
Yeah.
Busby did
I
post
think
on
had
his
it been very obvious, then they could have found him, but no one ever found him.
Busby did post on his Instagram that he was there, but that's the only sign anyone saw of him.
Don't you think it's going to be a lot worse this week?
Oh, yeah.
Right? In Cincinnati?
You know, and I actually had this conversation with the producer of the CBS number 4 crew who's doing that game, Jonathan Siegel, and AJ Ross, the brilliant reporter who will be on the sideline. Both of them, I actually messaged with them this week, and I was like, I think it's going to be way more fireworks, way worse, way more of everything that we kind of prepared for and worried about. I think they're going to see that in Cincinnati.
It's a hated division rival.
I was just going to go to this. I think there's an opportunity for this to develop into a really heated rivalry. From our perspective, I've never been no animus against the Bengals. It's like
I did though, but it was when Sam Weiss was there and he said you don't live in Cleveland.
I've always hated them.
But I found myself
because of that, right?
A bunch of reasons. I hate Cincinnati too as a city.
I've kind of found myself watching the Bengals and being like, okay, they went to the Super Bowl and we want to go there. And then now I agree with you guys. Deshaun Watson is probably going to get a very decent helping of booing. And I'm wondering, because the Browns, I got a lot of friends that are Bengals friends, like from that Columbus down, and they aren't as friendly as they used to. They don't like losing.
I'm friendly.
They don't like this losing.
I'm ornery about the law. I'm going to admit. Look. I'm going to admit. Everybody knows I root for the Browns to win 15 games, but I root for them to lose 2 games.
That's fair.
I'm very ornery right now about this.
Yeah, he's like, I'm tired.
I'll admit it. I'm tired of it.
I bet you are.
I'm tired of this nonsense.
It's tough for you because you're working in Cleveland.
Yeah. And I'm
Cleveland,
torn because from a professional, I do root for the Browns when they don't play the Bengals. And from a professional standpoint, it's better for us if the Browns win, which was why it was always stupid to me when fans were like, you want the Browns to lose? I'm like, no, it's better for business if the Browns win.
Do you think maybe you're just a Cincinnati fan because you've never been to Cincinnati?
Well, I don't have any. I'm not a Cincinnati fan. I'm a Bengals fan. I don't give a rat's ass about the city. I am a
but you know what's
Clevelander.
so funny? But you know what's funny about this, guys? My son asks me all the time who I'm a fan of. And he knows that when I was in New Jersey, I grew up a Giants fan.
Right.
But I'm always telling him that right now I'm a fan of me. Like, what's the best thing for me? What's the best storytelling I can do? What's the best for my career? And so, Adam, I think it's really funny that even at this point, your fandom is that strong. Because for me, the animosity for certain teams is stronger than the actual connective pull to the team. And what I mean by that is I grew up loving the New York Giants. That meant that I hated the Dallas Cowboys.
And the Eagles and the Redskins.
Right now, like, I really like Brian Dable, right? So, like, and I like the Mara family, and I like Mr. Tisch, and they were good to me. So, like, I want success for the Giants, sure, but, like, I don't really care. Like, if they win or they lose, I don't really care. But watching the Cowboys, that animosity certainly still exists. The Yankees. I grew up on the Yankees. Right now, I don't know if I could name 4 Yankees for you. I really don't think that I could. But the Red Sox, I still definitely have some animosity for the Red Sox.
That's funny.
I mean, I don't know. It's just, to me, that's the way fandom works.
I never hated the Browns as a kid. Never. Because my dad had rooted for the Browns when he was young. But I always hated the Steelers, and then I hated the Ravens.
G. Bush was like, it's never really been that thing for him. And it
was
for
in
me
the 80s.
In the 80s.
With
and
Bernie and Boomer.
Yeah, but my dad always used to tell me that he hated the Bengals because he loved Paul Brown.
Right.
He loved
everybody.
Paul Brown.
There's a lot of people like that.
And he just thought that football started and ended with Paul Brown.
Right.
And the fact that Art Modell fired him and he went to Cincinnati and started a team, as much as my dad always loved Paul Brown, he hated the Bengals' existence because it was a constant reminder that he's only there because Art Modell was an idiot.
Right.
And
yeah, but Jay, why should Paul Brown suffer for that? If anything, your dad should have moved over to the Paul Brown team.
That's
because
what
he was wrong by the Cleveland team.
You ask a logical question, Aditi. And I asked my dad.
That's what my dad did.
I said, Dad,
got wronged by Cleveland. Why stay loyal to Cleveland in that scenario?
I'll give you his answer because I said, Dad, why aren't we Bengals fans then?
Yeah.
It seems like you would have said enough is enough. And he said there's 2 reasons. I'll give you the biggest reason second. The first reason is I have to watch my team. And I can only watch the Browns. See, now this was before satellites and every game. He said, so I can't root for a team that I can't watch. And back then, you found out who won when you got the paper on Monday.
It was weird.
I mean, it was a different time.
It was hard.
It was a different time.
Even when I was a kid, I didn't have.
But then my dad, and this really speaks to, I miss my dad so much, and he taught me a lot of things about relationships and how you treat people and what they mean. But this was the second reason, and this was the biggest reason. He said, I'm loyal to my city. I'm cheering for the name on the front, not the name on the back. And unfortunately, Paul Brown was it was the Browns, for crying out loud. He said it was very difficult for me to separate my fandom and my love of the game from Paul Brown, especially because he went to a team in our division that now had to be my enemy. But I root for my city. I root for my team.
I always felt sad as a kid, a little bit. I was, my dad made me a diehard Cubs and Bengals fan. But I always felt sad that I didn't root for any New York teams. I was like, because I didn't have that camaraderie.
How did you guys do it like when it came to watching?
I barely ever watched them, to be honest.
And isn't that odd?
It's completely odd.
Yeah, it was
my
so
dad just
weird.
couldn't
Do it.
It was so weird being. I totally understand where your dad comes from. That makes complete sense. It was so odd as a kid. I very rarely watched either team play.
How would you find out when the Bengals won? Because the 10-minute ticker came around in the late 80s, which I loved.
Right.
Every 10 minutes they would put scores down.
I mean, we get the scores on like the news station
when
I was a young kid.
You got like call a cousin who lives near that town.
Or Sportsline.
Right.
CBS
Sports Phone.
What a crazy time. These kids today are so spoiled.
But you're right. I think that Aditi brought it up. We are more motivated by our resentment sometimes, and it's a stronger memory. I mean, there's a reason why political ads lean on that so heavily. There's psychological evidence behind that.
They never say the good things about their guys. It's always the bad things about the other guys.
Negativity sticks with us more.
I'm gonna be honest though. The common thread is, I know there's black, white, Republican, conservative. If the Browns win the Super Bowl, there will be thousands of grown-ass men crying.
Yes. Oh, yeah.
Literally.
Never before.
Like crying hard.
They were crying for the Cavs.
I cried. There.
I saw it with the Cavs.
I was there in Cleveland when they beat the Steelers to get that playoff berth. This was the COVID year, and there were people crying in the stands.
Yeah.
I mean,
cried
that
then,
was just
too.
to get into the playoffs.
Yeah,
Forget
right.
winning the whole thing.
Yeah.
But just getting in, and people were crying.
Yeah, it means a lot.
I cried once this year just watching Nick Chubb run in a regular game. I did. I literally just
I
cried.
will say that,
Paul,
just
speaking
random
of Nick
aside,
Chubb-
right,
He is beautiful.
before you
Yes.
get to me,
Beautiful.
I will say my favorite videos, the ones that I watch over and over, are like the team flying home to Buffalo in the middle of a snowstorm, and at 3 a.m. there are all these people at the
Oh,
airport
God.
cheering
Goosebumps.
players. Like
Yep.
that to
Yeah.
me means so much.
Yeah, call
I
me
hate
when
to do
Josh
this,
Allen
but
gets to the Super Bowl.
Hey,
Go ahead,
the one
Mikey.
seed in
Speaking
the
of Nick
AFC
Chubb,
now.
Aditi, you tweeted this out this morning. I was hoping you could give us a little more info on it, but take Tagboard full. This is a fun story you didn't get to share with us on the broadcast about one Nicholas Chubb. Apparently, he's Jerry Juice's fantasy running back.
Hughes.
That's what I said, Hughes.
Oh.
That's what I said.
All right.
I thought he said something else. Go ahead. Sorry.
No, I could read.
Questionable.
But Chubb is Jerry Hughes' fantasy running back, and he sat him in the because it wasn't the playoffs. And do you ever come across this more often, Aditi, that players are playing against the other players they have in fantasy, and what is that interaction like?
That is weird that
You know,
active players have a fantasy team.
Oh my God! So many of them
love
play.
it.
Don't you remember there was a game actually where Melissa Stark had this Sunday night report on Austin Eckler, who plays in like 6 or 7 leagues, and he was talking about how he, doesn't have himself in every one of the leagues,
But
and
he
he
tried
traded
to
up
trade
to
for
get
himself, didn't he?
in one league,
Yeah.
and he was already taken, so he had to settle for Derrick Henry. I just remember I generally don't talk fantasy football with players because I remember, 10, 11 years ago, I was in the Giants locker room. Must be 12 years ago, maybe. I'm in the Giants locker room, and someone Bull, Anita Marks, right?
Of course.
I know Anita.
Okay.
I
yeah.
made her career, for crying out loud.
Oh, okay. So the wonderful Anita Marks, before Bull made her career, or maybe while Bull was making her career.
I was driving her to
massively
work,
into
for crying out loud, Aditi.
Okay.
Give
okay.
him
Let me
credit
get my
for that
story.
woman.
We were
career.
doing shows together on the Fan in New York. She had no car. I would go pick her up. I could go
All right, we
further
gotta
and
say
further,
that.
but I'll leave it be because I like her. So go ahead.
Yes,
I
the
love her.
She
brilliant
played women's
Anita Marks.
professional football, by the way.
She did.
The brilliant Anita Marks, who taught me about fantasy football, frankly, she went up to Steve Smith, the wide receiver, not Steve Smith of Panthers and Ravens fame, but the other Steve Smith, one day, and says to him, "Oh, I have you on my fantasy team." And he was like, basically, so what? But not in that nice of a way.
Well, he's a
And it was
jerk.
just one of those like, okay, these guys don't really love the idea that people are so tied to what their production is and putting that sort of pressure, and football players are supposed to win. Who cares about how many touchdowns or how many PPR points they get or whatever?
They do hate
And
that
so-
part of it.
Yeah, so ever since then, I've sort of like kept away from that. I don't like that. Last year was the first time that I actually drafted my own team. Josh Allen and Joe Burrow were my quarterbacks, and Joe Mixon was my running back. And I remember telling Joe Mixon, I'm like, so I hate fantasy football. And he goes, yeah, me too. And I was like, oh, well, but you're my running back. So anyway, I just didn't really, I kind of stay away from that.
Yeah.
This came up because we were talking, I was just talking to him about fate. We were talking about the Texans. We were talking about rebuilding a young team. What are good signs, et cetera. Then we were talking about the matchup. Obviously, when you talk to an opponent of the Browns, you talk about the run game. And I was like, yeah, okay, so Nick Chubb. And he goes, I love him. And he's just like, he is... And then everything that you'd want to rip off, he says about him. And then he happens to tag on, he's my fantasy running back. And I was
That's
like,
great.
what? Really?
No, that's a cool
So then I
sidebar
just said, are you
story.
playing him this week? And he goes, no, I can't. He's like, I
great.
have to sit him. I mean, I have to shut him down. And then he says, thank goodness it's not the playoffs.
And he didn't have a great fantasy game.
How did CBS not find time to fit that into the broadcast?
I know.
It's a great story.
It's funny because we were talking about it beforehand, and Spiro, our play-by-play guy, was like, we've got to get that in. We've got to get that in.
It's
But,
fantastic.
the nature of the game. Guys, it was hard. We all talked about this last week. A regular game, you try to find some levity. You put the joy in your voice. Even something as simple as the post-game interview, you smile at the player that you're talking to. This was just a very, very different flavor tone to a game because of everything else attached to it. Yeah. And even when we were telling, important stories about Kevin Stefanski's initial pitch to Deshaun Watson, you sort of felt like you had to qualify it. Okay, once the grand jury delivered no indictment and once the Browns decided they're all in, then Kevin Stefanski had this meeting. You can't just sit here, the week before you could say, well, Mike McDaniel and I had this meeting where Mike McDaniel showed him. I wanted to be like, well, Kevin Stefanski and Deshaun Watson had this meeting where Kevin Stefanski showed him, but it just wasn't the game to do that. And so I think we just didn't have an opportunity. And also, quite frankly, it was an ugly game. Like, there was never a moment where Chubb and Hughes were on each other where you got to be like, oh, perfect moment to tell this story.
Yeah, but it is a great story. It really is. Aditi, you're awesome. I know you had all this anxiety last week about, this is a huge game and there's a lot you were freaking awesome
as always.
You always are. And I thought the tone was perfect. I love Spiro and Jay, as you know. I know Jay well. I interviewed Spiro like in 2004. He was named by our Cold Pizza show top 5 young broadcasters to watch, and I interviewed him. He'll never remember it, but
I'm going to text him right now, Jay.
I've loved him ever since then. I think he's a phenomenal talent, and one day he'll be the Joe Buck of CBS. I firmly believe that. He'll take the mantle from Jim Nantz. He's terrific.
And he's a better human. He really, really, truly, I will say that. I'm very lucky. Everybody I've
one of my neighbors knows him weirdly. Yeah. Like, literally, one of my neighbors, I'm walking the dog, and he said, ask me if I know Spiro. And I go, I met him, yeah. And he goes, yeah, it's my wife's cousin or something like that. So tell him I said hi. Great job, though. I really wanted to tell you that because I know you were anxious about it. I was just, every time you came on, I had a huge smile on my face.
Our whole house gets quiet when you come on. I'm like, everyone shut up, that's my friend.
Aditi's on, everybody shut up. All right,
Thank you, Aditi.
Thank you.
Bye, guys. Have fun. See you Thursday.